Yeah, with that, we have some amazing guest speakers who are here with us today from Munich Re. We have Kim Zhang, Actuarial Analyst Senior in Corporate Reserving, and we have Mark McChesney, Associate Actuary. So, with that, I will turn it over to you, Mark, to take it away. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Tandeka, for having us both here today to speak to everyone. I'm Mark. We'll do the intros on the next slide, but I just want to say first off, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and reach out anytime. I'm always happy to talk about the career with anyone who's interested in it. So please, anytime you'd like to, just reach out and I'd be happy to talk about the career. But for the introductions now, if this will go, I'm Mark McChesney. Since I sent the slides to Tandeka, I am now an actuary, not an associate actuary. And we just received exam grades yesterday, both me and Kim, and we both received passing grades. So that's always fun.
Congratulations! That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will get to the exam process at the end. It is long and difficult, but it's well worth it. But I will get into that a little more at the end. But a little bit more about me now. I have a bachelor's in econ from Boston College with a minor in math. I'm on the pricing team for the programs business at Munich Re North America. And one thing about that is that even though reinsurance is in our name, we do have a primary insurance division, which is the division I'm in. It's commercial insurance, dealing with kind of general liability, property, other things like that you've heard about. And I live in Philadelphia now, which is where I grew up. But I did spend time in Boston during and after college, and then a couple of years working in India as well. Both of those were actually before I became an actuary. I made a switch, I'd say about 4 years into my career. So if you're right out of college and you haven't started yet, it's never too late. It took me some time to figure out this is what I wanted to do. So this is my second career, and I'm enjoying it very much. But now I'll let Kim introduce herself a little bit.
All right, thank you, Mark. Hi, my name is Kim, and I apologize in advance for the background noise because I'm in office today, and right now it's our quarterly closing, and there's a lot of heated conversations happening. In case you wonder what is the background noises, so I'm currently a senior actuarial analyst. I studied actuarial science with a minor in real estate law. It's quite random, from Penn State, and I had my master's from NYU in financial risk engineering. And I'm on the other side of the traditional actuarial role. I'm currently on reserving team also for our primary insurance business at Munich Re, but I have had rotations with reinsurance pricing as well. So if you have more questions regarding what is reinsurance, how does that work, please don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me and I'll answer your question regarding to reinsurance as well. And I grew up in China. I came here for college about 10 years ago, and I currently live in New Jersey.
Thank you, Kim. And like Tandeka said, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions anytime throughout this presentation. We'll be happy to answer them. And there will be a time for questions at the end as well, hopefully. So if you have any questions, think of anything by the end, write them down and ask away. All right, so to start, we'll get really basic. What is an actuary? And basically, we use statistical methods to assess risk. That's really what it comes down to. So if you enjoy statistics, if you enjoy math, it's a great career to use those in, as far as that goes. And now there are some statistical concepts we use. Some are simpler, like just a mean and a median. We still talk about those expected values. We use them all the time. Others, like value at risk, tail value at risk, to kind of look at worst case scenarios, GLMs, p-values, t-tests. These are all things we use throughout our jobs. And it's so if you recognize any of those terms, those are things we use. And there are tons more. There are actuaries constantly writing new papers, bringing in new statistical methods that they've heard about, and saying how we can use them to, assess the risk of an insurance company or other types of companies as well. There's been more looking into things like machine learning with neural networks, all that kind of thing that data scientists and other data engineers are using. It's stuff that we're looking at as actuaries as well. So it's all important. So if any of that interests you, actuarial science really is a great pathway. for you. And why are actuaries specific to important to insurance in general? You can do other things, which I'll get to a little bit later. But why insurance? And really, it comes down to the fact that we sell a product that we don't know the cost of when we're selling the product, and that's kind of an important fact about insurance. If you're, a normal business, a burger joint, you know how much the beef costs, you know how much the cheese costs, you know how much the buns cost, say $1, and then you sell it for $5. Easy enough. You know the profit when you're selling it. When we sell an insurance product, a policy for say $100, there could be $500 of losses in the future on that. There could be no dollars of loss. So we don't know the profit. And when we pool all these risks together, we need to predict how many losses are going to arise. And that's really kind of the importance of actuaries. In doing so, we need to price the product we're selling correctly, and we need to assess the losses that will emerge over time as well. And that gets to kind of the two main different types of actuaries. There are many different things actuaries can do, but my role is pricing. Kim's is reserving. So within an insurance company, those are going to be the two main roles that we do. And pricing actuaries, we use historical data to build models or estimate necessary price changes to profitably insure a prospective book of business. And that's important. We're pricing to the future. And if there's a loss on an account, say there's a $1 million loss on an account where we got $3,000 of premium for, we don't try to recoup that losses. We only price for the risk in the future as if there was no loss. Now, a loss of $1 million could indicate that they are more likely to have a loss in the future, and we can incorporate that into a price. But we're not trying to recoup old losses. That's not an actuarial sound rate. And as far as actuarial sound rates go, a rate must be actuarial sound estimate of the expected value of all future costs associated with an individual risk transfer. And that's just basically saying what I've said. We're pricing for the expected loss in the future for the policy we write. So if we're writing a policy for 2026, we're pricing specifically for 2026. We're not punishing for past losses unless a past loss would predict a loss in the future. So we're pricing for those future losses. And other important things about an actuarial sound rate is that it can't be excessive. Number one, we're not going to charge you too much. It can't be inadequate. And this is something that's very important to regulators as well. A lot of people will think regulators would like to keep rates down, but they also want to ensure that the premium you're charging is enough to pay out claims in the future. Because if we can't pay out claims in the future, the insureds will be impacted as well negatively if their house burns down and the insurance company they went to can't pay out the claim. That's obviously a big impact on the insured. So it can't be excessive or inadequate. We're really looking for the right price, and regulators are looking at both sides. They don't want us to overcharge a consumer, but they also want to make sure we will be solvent in the case of large losses. And we can't be unfairly discriminatory. Things like race, gender, they look at. We can't charge differently for things like that. So those are all very important points. If you decide to take an actuarial career, those things are things you'll learn about constantly. They're in our actuarial standards of practice, which is something we follow as actuaries. And then reserving actuaries, which is Kim's role. They're more looking at the past losses. And the idea here is that even though these losses happened in the past, say in 2022, we don't know the full amount of loss right away. For something like a liability claim, those can take up to 10, 15 years, even longer to pay out. Even if we know a claim, someone fell off a ladder, say, and they sued our insured in a liability claim. We don't know how much we might say, we think we're going to pay out $500,000, but it can go out longer than that. The insured might, or the person making the claim might not be satisfied with the $500,000 and might go into litigation, which extends it even further, saying, I deserve more money. My injuries are worse, cost more to rectify than just the $500,000. So Kim, and she'll go over these reserving concepts in the past, so don't worry if you don't understand exactly what I just said there. She'll go over that fully. She's better at it than me. But the important point is reserving actuaries are looking at the past business and kind of estimating the full amount of losses on them, while pricing actuaries kind of look prospectively. We use data from past, and reserving data as well to predict future business. And finally, what else can actuaries do with their skills? There are a lot of things you can do. Statistics and math-based, there's always a lot of things you can do with them. Now, you can work in data science. There's a lot of kind of crossover between data science and actuarial science at this point. And you'll notice that if you start taking exams, there are a lot of data science concepts in the exams. And it's just a matter of putting together these insurance concepts with data science to really be a successful actuary. You can work in finance, you can work in consulting. There's roles in insurance companies even more than just pricing and reserving. Capital modeling has become a big one, and capital modeling is just really looking at the health of your capital as a whole, which will impact your ability to pay out claims in the future. So there's a lot of different things, including risk management, all these things. Risk management with not just insurance companies that you can do as an actuary. So if any of those sound interesting to you, it's a great career and a great path to look into. That all being said, now I'll hand it off to Kim, and she can talk about reserving in a little bit more detail than I did.
Well, thank you, Mark. So I want to first echo what Mark has mentioned, that as a reserving actuary, our full responsibility is that the insurance company has sell their policyholder a promise that in case of an accident happened, we promise to make you whole and reimburse you. And for a reserving actuary, it is our sole task to make sure that while the company fulfill this promise, the company is not going to be bankrupted, to make sure that on a company level, we still put aside enough money at the beginning so that we can reimburse our policyholders. And when we talk about losses from a reserving side, we tend to refer to the ultimate loss. So as the name indicates, ultimate loss is the final amount that the insurance company pays out on every single claim. But sometimes it might not as be straightforward to estimate what is the ultimate loss you're going to pay. And there are two main reasons. There are time delays in the lifetime when a claim happens. And Mark, if you click again, I think there's supposed to be two bubbles that should pop up. Yeah, so let's just walk through this life cycle of a claim with an auto claim example. For example, you're driving on the highway, traveling to see your friend, and everything was fine until a little rock has hit your windshield and you saw a crack on your windshield immediately. And this occurred when the rock has hit your windshield, and because you're driving at the moment, so you have discovered this loss almost immediately. And then what do you do next? You call your insurer and say, like, hey, I need to replace my windshield because there's a crack. It's not safe for me to drive like this. And if you click again, there should be another bubble pops up here. So the first time delay we'll see is usually between the claim occurring and you discover this claim, you discover a loss. And the second delay usually happens between the time that you find out about this claim and you let your insurer know versus what they finally pays you and settles. So in this case, for auto physical damage, it's usually very fast because you notice that you have this loss immediately. You call your insurer. It usually probably takes a month or two for you to get your windshield replaced, and you send your bill to your insurer. They have no problem with it. They says, okay, we're gonna reimburse you, and this is the amount of deductible. This part you had to pay for yourself, and the rest is on us. You got your windshield replaced. The case settled. So this claim has probably a lifespan of about 6 months, and it's a very short time period for you to get to that ultimate amount, right? And in this case, these two delays are not as obvious. But if we follow a different claim, for example, you are having fun with your friend, celebrating you passing an exam, for example, for me and Mark. We had a lot of drinks, and then your friend accidentally spilled a cocktail, and then there's alcohol everywhere, there's ice cubes, and while you help to clean up, you accidentally step on one of the ice cubes and you slip and broke your knee. Ouch, which is bad. And this slip and fall occurred in the bar, which is part of their GL policy, which is general liability, which yearly covers slip and fall in a restaurant. Um, so you incurred this loss in this bar, and does the restaurant have to pay and reimburse for your medical loss? You don't know that. The first thing you want to do is to get your knee fixed, right? So you goes to the hospital and the hospital bills you. And now you want to think about, wait, should I call the bar and see if they would cover some losses because they didn't maintain a clean environment, they didn't put a post say wet floor, be careful. Are they on hook for this loss? So you might want to get in touch with the restaurant or the bar to see, hey, can you reimburse me for some of these losses because I got hurt in this bar and maybe I can get some reimbursement from you. And then you also call your insurer, and maybe the restaurant will call their insurer and say like, hey, we have a slip and fall case. We're not sure how much liability we have because you spilled the drink yourself, and this is kind of an unforeseeable event. It's not like we can prevent it by putting signs everywhere that says, be careful, do not spill your drinks. So in this period, there might be a longer development time because the claim adjusters for the bar, the restaurant, and your health insurer probably need to sit together and see what is the liability on the restaurant's part, and are they really on hook to reimburse your medical costs because you got hurt in the bar? So in this case, that might take a lot longer than the auto physical damage claim that we just saw. And let's say after a year or so, this case has finally settled that the restaurant has paid a portion of your medical bill. And that would be coming from their GL policy. All right, and then we have two examples of the time delay. Now let's look at another example that's probably more extreme with very long lag for reporting. Oh, okay. So this is a very old example, as you can tell from the years here. So let's say in this case, we are insuring a construction company who has been commissioned to build a bridge. And 1990 is when the construction project started. And at the beginning, there are some planning errors, probably because the construction company wanted to save some money and they might have used some of the cheaper materials as indicated here. So there were some planning errors at the beginning, but nobody have noticed it. And the bridge is built and it has put into work. And then 7 years later, we found out that there has been a crack that we found under the bridge, but there's a crack. It's not like the bridge has collapsed. So nobody has reported this. Everybody go on with their lives, and insurance company has no idea what's going on. Maybe the construction company have no idea what's going on either. But give it another, I think, 8 years. In 2008, the claim is finally discovered because we are seeing a collapse of the bridge, and it's very apparent there might be people getting hurt. And after the bridge has collapsed, the people who rely on this bridge to commute to their work, who rely on this bridge to get their business, now suddenly face this issue that, well, people cannot come to my restaurant because this bridge does not work and this whole road has been closed so that we can fix it. And this is probably the time that the construction company find out that, hey, this bridge that we built years ago has collapsed. Something has gone wrong. And then next year, they reach out to their insurer saying that we have this case and this bridge has collapsed. But at this time, we still don't know where or what exactly went wrong because there could be many small moving pieces that could gone wrong in the construction of the bridges. So you have to go to court to see what is a comparative liability from each of the party involved. It could be that the structural engineer did not follow the protocol, and it could be the construction company that has planning error, or it could be your subcontractor. Maybe they didn't do their job properly. And at this point, I think 20 years has passed, and there could also be cases where the safety protocol has been updated within this 20 years. So maybe 20 years ago, you weren't required to do this series of testings when you plan for a bridge, but then 20 years later, you have. So when this case went to trial, the judge will decide what is a comparative liability for each party involved. And in different jurisdiction, that could mean different things. In some jurisdiction, if you are over 50% liable, then you are on hook for the damage you have caused. But for some jurisdiction, if you are less than 51% liable, then you're excused from the liability. And in our case, we find out that the construction company is liable. And in the next year, we finally have the ultimate claim settlement after a total of 23 years. So in this case, it has taken 23 years for us to finally arrive at the ultimate claim settlement. So if you think about it, in 1990, we already covered this construction company. So at this point, when we write the policy, us, the reserving actuary, need to put aside a portion of money for the cases that might have happened in the future. But at this point, we have no idea what his amount is going to be. It could be 10 million, it could be 20 million. You have no idea. This is when we use the history to guide us. And one example, it might be like if we're insuring a construction company, we might look at what are the other construction companies' loss. And slowly within this 23 years, we are slowly getting to the ultimate loss amount closer and closer at each step. And when I look at this example, this reminds me of one real life cases. So if you guys remember, in 2024, there was a bridge that collapsed in Baltimore. So this cases does happen. I know that what we are showing here seems like a very extreme case of bridge collapse, but those cases does happen. And in the Baltimore case, the bridge did not collapse because of a planning error. The bridge has collapsed because there were cargo ships that hit the pillars that hold up the bridge. And in that case, it might take even longer to find out what are the liability issues for each parties involved because the bridge still collapsed, right? But is the engineer on hook for this? Is the architect on hook for that? Or they could jump up and argue that our bridge is sound and it haven't been fixed properly after the cargo ship has hit it. But just an example to show you that in real life, these cases can get very complicated and might take longer for a case to settle. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Now you have a general sense of what we're looking at. Now let's get down to some of the acronyms that we use to identify each part of these losses. So at the very beginning, when we need to set aside a bucket of money for the future losses, we call this loss reserve for outstanding claims, or IBNR, which stands for incurred but not reported. So which I think the acronym's actually straightforward. So this is basically saying that this claim has already occurred, just like the planning error has occurred, but it has not been reported to you yet. And it probably won't be reported to you in 10 years or so, but it is somewhere out there and you need to set aside money for that. And we can further split IBNR into two different portions. The first part is a late reported claim, which is called incurred but not yet reported, or IBNYR. So this is basically what we are seeing at the first three stage of a claim life cycle. So in 1990, the planning error has already occurred, which means there's probably some damage that will occur in future. And we already should have a dollar amount assigned to this claim. And when it actually occurred, the insurance company is still not informed until years later, right? So in the first three stages, the cost occurs and discovered, we should have a lost dollar amount that sit in the bucket of IB and YR. That means it has incurred, the damage has already occurred, but it has not been reported to us yet. And then the second component of IBNR is incorrectly assessed claims, which is called incurred but not enough reserved, which is IBNER. So let's fast forward to when we got notice that the bridge has collapsed. So our claim adjuster has received this. The first thing we do is we want to look at what is the limit on this policy. We promised that we are going to reimburse this construction company, but each policy has a maximum, right? In this case, our maximum reimbursement is $5 million. And our claim adjuster has looked at the case very briefly with all the information that this construction company has provided to us and think, okay, I think 1 million seems like a decent amount of number that I'm going to put 1 million in this on this case right now. So this case right now has a loss amount attached to this claim of 1 million. And then as this case go to trial or at the beginning, you want to try, can we settle? And then with more information we're receiving, we keep updating this loss amount that we're getting. So maybe given a couple months, we receive more information and we slowly learn that, yes, this construction company indeed has negligent act when they were planning for this bridge. So it is likely that this case is going to be awarded for more than 1 million. But how much is that? We rely on the expertise of our claim adjusters, and they come in and adjust it, says, I think this case is going to be 3 million instead of the 1 million we originally set up. So this loss amount went up by 2 million. Now we're looking at a 3 million claim. And then finally, this claim settles at 3.5 million. And this 3.5 million is our ultimate loss on this claim. So if you look at the life cycle of this claim, the long settlement period is caused by two reasons. The first is the time delay between the individual settlement steps, because the claim took a long time to be discovered, to be reported, and then finally goes to court and then finally settles. All this takes a long time. And the second step is the gradual claims regulation due to an unclear situation, because at the beginning, you wouldn't have known how much the construction company is liable for, and you don't really know how much the judge is going to award as a damage, because for something like negligence, it is likely that there will be punitive damage as well. So all the unclear legal situation could prolong the settlement of a case. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, and then this chart, this is probably the most technical chart, at least from my side. I'm pretty sure Mark has more technical details on the pricing side. This is the most technical chart we're going to see for a reserving side. So on the bottom, you can see the timeline of a claim from cause, occurrence, discovery, reporting, and settlement. And this blue boxes and the acronyms shows what component it belongs to in the ultimate loss. So after we have write the policy, we will have this IBNYR, which is incurred but not yet reported. And until the claim is reported to us, we will have the IBNER, the case reserve, and paid data, because you will slowly start to pay the damages that this bridge collapse has caused. And all this slowly goes up to ultimate loss. So the true ultimate loss or the cost of insurance policy will slowly be reviewed with time. But the tricky part is that as a reserving actuary, you need to put a number at the beginning of all this time. So for example, you need to have an estimate of what is the ultimate loss in 1990, even though the true loss will only be known to you 23 years later. And So far, we have only looked at the cost part of an insurance policy. For reserving actuaries, our job is to look at a book of business. So instead of just one construction company, we might look at this book of construction business. We insure like 200, 500 construction companies, and we try to come up with the ultimate loss for each segment. But for pricing actuaries, their job is trickier because reserving actuaries, we make sure the ultimate loss is accurate on an aggregate level. But you still have to know how much you're going to charge each person when you're drilling down to the finer granularity on each policy level, which is a perfect segue that we will switch to the pricing view, and I'll hand it off to Mark.
All right, thank you very much, Kim, for all that on reserving. And she's right. So we do have to use reserves in pricing to get a final premium. And while we sometimes use the ultimate values provided by the reserving team, sometimes we have to do this on our own as we get to a more granular level, and we have to kind of reserve by a specific smaller book of business. They might reserve for Munich Re's general liability as a whole. We might have to look at a specific program of general liability into price. But before we get into any more of that, I will start with kind of what's the fundamental insurance equation, as we call it. And that's just premium needs to equal the losses plus the LAE, which is a type of expense. It's loss adjustment expense. And these are expenses you can kind of attribute specifically to claims. So something like the cost of a lawyer if a claim goes into litigation, claims handler salary could go into this. So losses and LAE are often grouped together in pricing. And if you did the losses and the LAE divided by the premium, that's normally what a loss ratio would be, if you've ever heard that term. Now, next, you would add underwriting expenses. Underwriting expenses are going to be these expenses for a company that you can't attribute to specific claims. It's going to be your overhead for buildings, your salaries for everyone else, including actuaries, underwriters, these kind of things, similar to expenses across other countries. And finally, underwriting profit. We are a company or corporation. We're trying to make a profit. There will be a provision in these policies for a profit, and that will change depending on kind of the riskiness of a specific policy. It can change based on if it's a long or short tail. So like Kim was saying, a builder's risk policy could have a very long tail. It could take 23 years to pay out. Now, you received that premium 23 years ago. You haven't paid it out yet. You can invest that premium. So you can make investment income on that. So that will go into the amount of profit that you need to make, an underwriting profit that you need to make, the riskiness and other things, and just company goals as a whole. But an important thing to remember about this equation is it's never going to be balanced. Everything we do is estimates, and it's not a balanced equation. But based on our estimates, we want to balance it. So the easiest way to make the premium equal all these things is through a rate change. And that's the preferred way. That's what we do a lot of time. It'll be called an indicated rate change. Say based on how losses have gone so far, we expect a 53% loss ratio on this, but we want a 51% loss ratio or something like that. Then we will need to increase the rates to balance this equation again, to get the premium equal to all these factors. Now, you can look at the right-hand side of the equation and change that. How would we decrease losses? Maybe something like loss control. You go in, we can send a rep into an insured and say, if you do these few things, you're less likely to have a loss, which will be good for the insurance company and the insured. So that could decrease the losses. Another way would be to increase or add deductibles to policies. Now, sometimes adding a deductible with no premium change could be considered a rate change, as a deductible should have a factor that decreases your overall premium. So sometimes that could be called a rate change. Sometimes it could impact losses. It can go to either side of this equation. Underwriting expenses, cut salaries, change your kind of real estate output, lower your leases, stuff like that. Is how you could change that. And profit, you can tinker with profit, but that's normally going to be set a corporate level profit target that we have. So the goal is normally to target the premium side, but you can target losses and expenses and things like that to balance this equation, which is what we're trying to do in the end. And finally, we always look at the combined ratio. So this will be a measure of your underwriting profit, basically. You'll take your losses, LAE, and underwriting expenses and divide that by premium. Now, anything above 100 means that you are not profitable from an underwriting perspective, and below it means you are. Now, you don't need to be below 100 to be profitable as a whole. As like I said, if you're looking specifically at a longer tail line of business that could pay claims over 20, 25 years, you can make a lot of investment income on that premium. So for those, you don't necessarily need to target a combined ratio under 100, but you often will anyway, to make an underwriting profit. So now I'm just going to go into a little bit of really what I do as a pricing actuary day to day, in the name of balancing that equation and kind of looking at the premium side and turning it into rate changes. Now we look at all this historical data, loss data, premium data. Those are the two most important things, and we need to decide how we can use that, to be predictive of the future. Now. We have to adjust the losses and the premium to make it predictive of the future. This data in the past needs to be developed, on-level, trended. These are the terms we use to make it predictive of the future. And a good way to illustrate this is, say you had a loss in 2008, your house burned down, and it would cost $500,000 in 2008 to rebuild that house. That same house in 2025, it would be a lot more expensive to rebuild. So it's not one-to-one. And we need to look at that loss and say, what if this loss happened in 2025 or 2026 when we're pricing the policy to? So we need to trend that. And you can kind of look at that from kind of an inflationary sense. Inflation is a big driver of these loss trends. There could be other things. For liability policies, we've seen an explosion of these really what's called nuclear verdicts, where our insureds are paying out a lot more for the same liability claims than they did in the past, because they go to court and the jury awards very, very large, millions and millions of dollars worth of rewards that we didn't think we'd have to pay. And that can be seen in a severity trend. So a general liability claim from 2005 would have paid less than it would in 2025. So we need to account for that when we're pricing to the future. So we need to adjust this past data. The other thing we need to do to losses is develop them. And that's a lot of what Kim was talking about. We need to estimate this IBNR, which is split between the YR and the IBNER. And they do a lot of that. And there's going to be less development on losses from 2005 than there is in 2025, just because there's going to be more time to pay claims for 2025. And the ones from 2005, for most lines of business, would be fully paid out or close to fully paid out. And then we look at the premium as well. We have to adjust that when we're analyzing the past. Trend is very similar. If we look at an exposure, again, I'll go back to the house. We try to match the trend up for premium or exposure trend similarly to the losses. So your house in 2008 was worth $500,000. It would be worth more now. And that's kind of what we're rating against. So we would trend, since a premium coming down to it is going to be a rate times your exposure. Say your $500,000 house, you paid $2,000, and then it increased to $550,000. So that's a 10% increase. You pay $2,200 now. We didn't change the rates at all. Your house just became more valuable, so it's more expensive to insure. So we have to trend at that side as well. Now, these don't always match. You'd hope that this loss trend and the exposure trend or premium trend would be one-to-one, but that's not always been the case. So there will be differences between them. And then finally, we have to on-level. If there have been any rate changes since you wrote the policies in 2010, we need to account for them, because the same policy, the insured would have paid more for now. So to predict in the future, we need to on-level and trend. These aren't the most straightforward concepts, but they're very important in pricing. If you have any questions about them now or want to ask them at the end of this session, please just let me know. As I know, it doesn't always go through the first time. But I'll just do a quick example now, illustrating all these changes for kind of a very simple example of what we're doing. We look at the premium we've earned since 2020 on a book of business. We see it was $1 million in 2020. Then in 2024 on all these policies, we earned $1.8 million of premium. Here's that exposure trend, accounting for the fact that homes in general have increased in value. On-level factors, this is what I use to account for any rate changes since 2020 would have impacted the 2020 premium. We need to account for that. All these policies would have cost more now, and we would have received that premium. And finally, we get this trended and on-level premium. And that's really what we're going to use in the analysis. We do the same thing for loss. We trend the losses. Again, it's similar to exposure trend. A house would cost a lot more to rebuild today than it would have in 2008. And then the loss development factors. Now, this is accounting for all those reserves. We've incurred $500,000 in losses that we know of, or in this case, $600,000 that we lost of losses that we know of now. We multiply that by 1.7 to have the final kind of expected amount that includes this IBNR, incurred but not reported losses. And we'd see in 2020, the factor will be a lot lower because more of those losses we know about at this point than we do the losses that occurred in 2024. And finally, we get the trended and developed losses. So we're looking at the losses against the premium, and we'd have a loss ratio. We see them by year, and then this total is just going to be a weighted average of the losses over the premium. So we have a 73% final pick based on this very simple analysis of what we did. Now, based on company targets that we get from corporate or whomever, we targeted for this book of business a 68% loss ratio. That allows us to be profitable enough given the risk that we're taking on for this business. Now, if we're expecting a 73% based on all these trends, all this analysis that we did, we would need a rate change to reach that number. So the simple algebraic equation to get that is our 73% loss ratio divided by the 68 that we want minus 1. So if we increased rates, increased our premium by 7.4%, we'd be right on the money with where we need to be. And again, this is all estimates. We're actuaries. We're not always right, but this is where we think the book would need to be healthy. And then we'd communicate that with the underwriter. And again, this is only one part of a healthy book of business. The underwriters, the actuaries, internal, corporate, they're all looking at these books of business and assessing a lot of different factors. But one of the things the actuaries provide is this rate need or indicated rate change to make this book of business healthy and profitable given the risks we're looking at. So that's basically a very simple example of what you could do as a pricing actuary. This is the indication piece. Now, if you're building a model from loss data to say, if you want to set prices for a specific policy and you're building models, you would also have to adjust the data in the proper way. So it's these adjustments are very universal. If you start taking the exams, you'll see them constantly, the trending, the on-leveling, and the development. These are adjustments to the data that are very important if you want your data to be predictive of the future. So again, that was just a very quick look into one thing you can do as a pricing actuary. Next, we're going to go back to more of general actuarial careers and look at kind of the two different societies that you can join in the US or Canada. And those are the Casualty Actuaries Society, which is both the path Kim and I are taking, and then there's the Society of Actuaries. Now, the only difference between the two is that Casualty looks at property and casualty insurance. So all these lines, homeowners, auto, GL, professional lines, which would deal with stuff like medical malpractice, attorney liability, stuff like that, workers' comp. And then the Society of Actuaries looks at life, health, pensions, and things like that. So if you ever hear about the actuarial tables that people enjoy to bring up, that would be a Society of Actuaries thing, looking at predictions on how long you're expected to live, basically, is the Society of Actuaries Society. So it's very long process. It can be shorter for some people. It's difficult, but it's well worth it if you take the path. And I'll look at a few of the differences. So starting, there's these VEEs. Now VEEs, and you don't have to do it in this exact order, but the VEEs are just called validation of educational experience. Now, a lot of people who have taken econ, math, statistics, or accounting classes in college can skip these. You would just have to submit them to the society, and they'd say, yes, your class qualifies. Now, I had an econ class that did work for this, but I had never taken an accounting or a finance class. So I did have to do a separate, it's a test, a course. There are a lot of different ways you can satisfy it. So they're not as difficult, but then you get into the exams 1 and 2, which are the same between both societies. It looks at financial math and probability for these two. So it's a good idea to show you the exam process. They are difficult exams, as they all are. And then once you get through those parts, I mean, discs are just online courses. I'm not super sure about these e-learnings, as this is not the path I took. But I think it's very similar with online courses. But this is where we really see them change. You start to take different exams. These MAS 1, 2, 5, and 6, those are 4 different exams. The MAS 1 are modern actuarial statistics. They deal with a lot of these data science concepts that I had talked about. They would deal with in the past. And the PCPA is a course on analytics and predictive analytics as kind of, it's a new addition, but actuaries, they want to be prepared for what's coming in the future. And analytics is very important, and these analytic concepts are very important. Then you do a project. ASA has difficult exams as well, actuarial mathematics, long-term math, short-term math, all these things. Again, difficult exams. And more courses, and they have a seminar on professionalism. We have a course on professionalism, very similar, just to look at these standards of practice of being an actuary, what it means to be an actuary, and how you can do it well and kind of within compliance. And once you finish those, you become what's called associate. You join the society finally, and some people stop there. Some people want to take it further and become a fellow. For CAS, it's 3 more high level difficult exams. For FSA, you take courses and projects, and then you're an actuary. But really, the decision on what you want to do is whether you want to look at property casualty insurance or you want to look at the kind of life, health, pension side of things. But yeah, this is a just real quick look at kind of the 2 main paths you can take if you wanted to be an actuary, and the 2 societies that you could join. But I think we have 8 minutes left, so I do want to open it up for any questions about the career in general, any of the pricing or reserving concepts that we had talked about. Really, anything you want to ask about, please ask away. I see Tapiwa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Mark and Kim, for the insightful presentations. My question is with regards to Kim's presentation on claims development. Was I've just seen that a claim takes longer for it to be studied and finally settled. So what are some of the things that you do as insurers or reinsurers to make sure that you restore confidence or you maintain confidence of your policyholders? Because if you take a look at the policy underwriting, it doesn't take a month to write a policy, but for you to completely settle a claim, it takes years and years. So what are some of the things that you do to make sure that you treat your policyholders fair? Yeah.
That's a very good question. And so first, when we look at the loss development, we really look at it on a very broad level. So for example, for commercial auto, we might be looking at lots of history because our company has our internal loss history, right? And then we look at what has happened in the past that if we were writing 50 millions of premium, we could our historical loss ratio on average would be like 65%. And then this is what we book. And we believe that, okay, let's just hold 65% out of the premium we write each year. And let's say this is our ultimate loss. But that might not always be true, right? As you mentioned, there could be a very large loss that comes in. And another thing we do as reserving actuary is each quarter, our reserving actuary looks at something called actual versus expected. So we have this expectation of how much we expect this book of commercial auto to to develop. For example, in this quarter, we are expecting 5 million of losses. And then we expect that give it like 20 more quarters, we shouldn't be seeing any loss development at all. But sometimes could be a large loss, or there's a change in loss trend, or you just wrote some really bad business this year. So the actual comes into like 8 million, which is a lot higher than what you have expected. So this is an alarming sign. And then the reserving actuary will go into the losses that we're seeing to actually find out what is going on. Is this just a one-off really large loss we're seeing, or is it something really serious, or like a true loss trend? For example, as Mark has mentioned, the juries are giving higher and higher awards, and it's a common trend that we're seeing right now. So we might need to adjust our assumptions. Maybe 65 is no longer enough. We need to raise it up to maybe 70 so that we are comfortable that we hold enough money for this future loss development. Did that answer your question? Oh,
yeah, and one more point. We can't really get into it now. We don't have enough time. But a lot of times to estimate these losses, there are a few main methods. But if you want to read, there's a lot of documentation on the CAS website, or just Googling. It's very easy to find. If you wanted to look at the chain ladder method or something called the Boynharter-Ferguson method, those are two ways that actuaries have decided to kind of estimate the amount of claims that are ultimately going to pay for each year. And we use something called loss triangles. So if you looked up any of these concepts, you should be able to find documentation and papers that actuaries have written for what's the best way to estimate the development that's going to happen on these losses. But it was a good question. I do appreciate that. We don't have much time left, so I did want to get to, I think Esther had a question too. I saw her hand raised.
Exactly. Go for it, Esther.
I just have a quick question. How has data science or AI impacted the way actuaries approach pricing?
So data science has greatly impacted it. So I would consider GLMs, or generalized linear models, come from data science. That's one way we build models to make a price for an individual policy. Now, people have brought in things like neural networks. Again, I would consider data science, or other machine learning type algorithms, to kind of select factors that we think they're more used to select factors we think could be built into a GLM model. But there are other ways to use them to kind of properly price in the future. Now, there is one main issue with data science methods, specifically neural net. There's something called generalized boosted models. All these type of things is we have to explain them to regulators, specifically if we're in an admitted line of business. And that's why some of these insurtechs are popping up all the time. They like to use these data science models to price things. But we need to explain them to regulators, and the regulators don't always love explanations if it's not readily apparent. Say, maybe, what if we found a factor based on our data science methods that the color of socks you wear predicts the amount of accidents you're going to get to? We would also have to explain that to a regulator, and we couldn't. There needs to be really an evident example. And it's more of an issue for something like car insurance, where regulators look stronger as opposed to commercial insurance, where they're a little more lax. But a lot of times it's really an offset between all these new great data science methods that we think can be predictive versus what regulators will allow us to use. But that is a great question, and there's a ton of crossover. And again, there have been papers written on all these things like neural nets in insurance and other machine learning algorithms, and there's a ton of crossover. But
and I would say one interesting factor that would match this question is basically the use of credit scores in pricing, because credit score is proven to be statistical significant predictor, but we are not allowed to use it. Many states actually bans the use of it because they feel like the credit score is related to race, gender, and all this different things, and they feel like even though it's statistically significant, we cannot use it because it might be biased. And there's a lot more nuance when you get into pricing, because you need to make sure your rate has to be fair. It cannot be unfairly discriminatory, as Mark has mentioned, and you will be able to explain for pricing models.
Awesome. So with that, we are at time. So I did want to say thank you to Kim and Mark for being here with us today and hanging out with us for an hour. So if you could all give them a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for being here with us. As mentioned, we host these sessions weekly over the summer. So next week's session is going to be Thursday, June 12th from 1 to 2 Eastern. Our presenting organization is going to be MRIA, which is the Multicultural Reinsurance Association. And our guest speaker is going to give us a reinsurance 101 boot camp so that we all have a strong foundational understanding of what reinsurance is and how it operates. So again, thank you to Kim and Mark for being here with us today. And for all of the students, I will see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Well,
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.